Okay, today's session, Creating Inclusive Employment, the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy, is brought to you by the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. We're a national network of several hundred community organizations and individuals working to create local economic opportunities that support an inclusive and sustainable economy. You can see from this slide just a few of the logos from across the country. And also, you can see here an image of our new website member map. You can find members that are close to you on the map, located at the web address listed at the bottom of the screen. And if you like the session today and you're not a member, consider joining us and signing up for our free newsletters and following us on social media. So CCEDNet has done a number of webinars like this one in recent years. You can see some of the topics covered, and all of these are on our website, and all of them are free for our members. And as we mentioned earlier, today's webinar will also be added and be available online. Welcome, and you can, there's my picture, and the webinar today is going to be divided into two parts. So the presenters today, Zach and Darcy, will speak for about 30 minutes. Then in the second part, I'm going to ask them questions that you have posted in the chat box. So we're depending upon you to put questions in the chat box. We'll just pick them up from there and then carry on the conversation. So post your questions, your comments, and other information you'd like to share as well, because it's really not just questions, but it's great to have a bit of a conversation as well. So what we'd like to do, though, before we get into the presentation is just so we get to know who's on and each other, if we can ask you to look at, take a couple polls. You can see they just popped up on your screen. And question number one is really about how familiar are you with social enterprise? So you can actually check multiple boxes. So some people you can see are starting to do that. So please, go through that one. And the second question, when you get to that, is what best describes your interest in this session? And again, you can select all that apply. And it's going to be taking this poll, and we'll look at it in just a few minutes. And while you're doing the poll, what I'd like to do is introduce you to our presenters today and a bit of background. So in February of 2015, the Manitoba government launched the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy. It was co-created by the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. And the strategy aims to create jobs in the province through the development of social enterprises. So a very interesting demand-side model. The strategy is based on 6 pillars. So the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy, a bold statement by the province about the importance of social enterprise in job creation and the role of government can play to support the growth of this component of the economy. The webinar will cover a number of things. We're going to examine the Canadian and international landscape very quickly of different social enterprise strategies and the supports and compare to Manitoba's new strategy. We're going to describe how CCEDNet and the provincial government led an inclusive process to co-construct the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy, highlights of the strategy, and also then look at some of the strengths and the weaknesses and some of the particular aspects of this strategy. And we hope then that this is a way that we can share lessons and advice for other jurisdictions, because a great learning happened in Manitoba, and this is a way for us to review it and for us a way to share it with other jurisdictions. We can see now, let's go back to the poll and just see, thank you everyone for filling that out. It's interesting, so quite a bit of, more than half the people quite familiar with social enterprise, and more than half actually have written or done research on social enterprise. So it's really kind of interesting. But what's also interesting is the theory and practice may be new. So this is really good that we start to get into some of the policy issues around social enterprise. In the second poll, we can see people are involved in policy development, and what's really interesting is a really strong interest in co-production and co-creation. And I think what happened in Manitoba, obviously, one of those great opportunities to discuss that model of policy development. So I know that Darcy and Zach are going to be addressing that as we go forward. So thanks for that poll. If you will keep that as background for our conversation today. Before we get into the Manitoba story, I just want to give a bit of background on some of the social enterprise strategies that have been implemented in Canada and elsewhere. And I think the most interesting story in Canada goes back actually to a very early connection we had with the UK in terms of how we developed the pillar process, the 6 pillars that lead the social policy agenda in Canada, goes back to the Canadian Conference on Social Enterprise that happened in Vancouver in 2007. And at that conference, we actually invited, at that time, Jonathan Bland was the Executive Director of Social Enterprise UK, and one of the designers of the social enterprise policy in the UK. So Jonathan came and was one of the speakers at that conference, and also Liam Black came from the UK, who at that time was the head of Jamie Oliver's Foundation and Jamie Oliver's Social Enterprises. So back in 2007, we actually had the introduction from the UK on how they developed their policy, how they were engaged with government. And then that led to what at the time was a combination which was called the Social Economy Roundtable in British Columbia, which was participants from CCEDNet, from the social enterprise sector, and others who in 2008 gathered on a policy session and looked at a framework for social enterprise, and which led to the dialogue in 2009, which was the Canadian Conference on Social Enterprise, where a Canadian framework of the 6 pillars of business acumen, access to markets, demonstrating value, access to social finance, networking, and government support, government infrastructure, were all kind of adopted as a framework. And it's fascinating to watch as Canadian framework was developed. It's been adopted in a number of ways. We've seen parts of it significantly adopted in Ontario, and in fact in Ontario going back several years, where they looked at poverty reduction through purchasing from social enterprises. And then now we're seeing Ontario looking at other aspects of a social enterprise environment. Nova Scotia has passed a commitment to social enterprise, and they have passed legislation but no regulations yet for a hybrid corporation. British Columbia has put pieces together, including a hybrid corporation. In fact, in British Columbia, this month is Social Enterprise Month, so there's a lot of activity going on in British Columbia. The province, the Ministry of Social Development and Social Innovation just announced their social impact purchasing guidelines, a lot going on. And of course, Quebec has been working on the social economy and social enterprise since the launch of Chantier de l'Économie Sociale in 1995. So a lot has gone on across Canada, especially in the last, and it's pretty amazing, in 8 years, a lot has evolved. And I think Manitoba story today is really sort of the kind of brings together a lot of those pieces of the Canadian initiatives. The other piece that we have to look at, and we've worked quite a bit with our colleagues in Scotland, and it's very fascinating that they've had from probably 2004, a very strong government support for the concept of social enterprise right at the cabinet level. And in next month in Scotland, they're actually announcing an entire revamped and updated social enterprise engagement strategy. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next couple slides in the next 20 or 30 minutes is really based on a lot of these developments that we've seen across Canada. So today, Zach is going to be leading part of the conversation. Zach has been a project manager in the Priorities and Planning Committee of the Manitoba Cabinet since 2013. That committee was formed in 2012 and is responsible for prioritizing and setting direction for social policies and overseeing the implementation of these policies. Zach is particularly interested in strategies for addressing issues around economic development, employment, and income distribution. He has an MA in economics and from the University of Manitoba. Darcy Penner is the Social Enterprise Policy and Program Coordinator with the Canadian CED Network. And he's been working in community economic development since graduating from the University of Winnipeg with a BA degree in politics. So starting at CCEDNet in 2013, Darcy's role has been to work with member organizations to pursue a broad policy agenda through workshops, presentations, budget submissions, policy papers, community organizing, but specializing in supportive social enterprise policy and research, including coordinating the Manitoba Social Enterprise Sector Survey and the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy co-created with the province of Manitoba. So special thanks to Zach and Darcy for joining us today. And I think right now, the best thing to do is to hand it over to the two of you to carry on with your presentation.
Thank you, David. So again, thank you very much. My name is Darcy Penner, and I am the Policy and Program Coordinator here at CCEDNet in the Winnipeg office, dealing with social enterprise. And so I'll sort of just kick off this presentation here. It was good to see everyone's interest of what they wanted to hear from it, and that a lot of people wanted to understand the process of co-creation and the focus of co-creation, which I think is what's going to consume a decent amount of the presentation here. So to start things off, I'm just going to give an overview of the actual process that it came when it was from conception until delivery of the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy. So in 2013, after the Social Enterprise World Forum in Calgary, there had been a large contingency of Manitoba-based social enterprise practitioners and developers who had attended this forum. And they returned back to Winnipeg with a certain amount of gusto and passion for seeing what could be accomplished. So CCEDNet brought together what we had was a loose working group called the Social Enterprise Working Group. And this was a working group of social enterprise practitioners, developers, and researchers. And so they were brought together after the World Forum to reflect on the state of our sector and to see where we can go from here and how we can get there. Out of this came a desire to pursue having a strategy built and pursue partnering with the province of Manitoba, since that is mostly their jurisdiction for a lot of the areas that we're looking at, to put together a co-created strategy. So CCEDNet members passed a policy resolution in November of 2013, calling upon the province to build upon their commitment to social enterprise development by allocating the required resources to co-create and co-produce a Manitoba social enterprise strategy in full partnership with the social enterprise community, with a particular focus on social enterprise development with the social enterprise community, with a particular focus on social enterprise development where the mission is job creation and training for people with barriers to employment. This key focus, this narrowing focus on particularly social enterprises that are dealing with job creation and training, brought our focus in line with much of some of the province's commitments and desires when it came to their job commitments. And in Budget 2014, the Province Command of Manitoba committed to the development of the Social Enterprise Strategy. So from this point, we struck a steering committee to guide the process and to guide the development of the document. This steering committee was comprised of half government and half community members from the various departments that were going to be affected by the Social Enterprise Strategy, and this is notably housing and community development and jobs and the economy. And then from community members, social enterprise leaders, practitioners, developers, researchers, and CCEDNet. So the first task of the co-creation was to take care of research, and this consisted of analyzing the local context, that was the Manitoba Social Enterprise sector, and the ecosystem that existed in the forms of supports, and looking at what existing assets were available to us. This also included the province coming to the table with a very clear agenda of all the programming and policy that they had that was either closely applicable to social enterprise or directly applicable to social enterprise. This research also included looking at the other strategies that the other provinces and jurisdictions have put together. David had talked about these just a moment ago. And then also looking for innovative practice when it came to what are other provinces, what are other countries, what are other jurisdictions doing that is the most innovative work around supporting social enterprise development. After this research, it was brought forward to our first forum, and these forums were large forums making up of social enterprise representatives, again, the usual gamut of practitioners, developers, researchers, but then also government employees, both members of ZAC's committee, and then also the departments that would be involved with some of the changes and some of the policy and programs that we're going to be dealing with. So they came together for the first forum to present research. We presented the research to the forum, and we identified the community needs, the needs that were identified to us by our community consultations. We took those back. We prepared a document and a draft of a strategy that we felt would, in conjunction with priorities and planning with the government of Manitoba, we put together a package of policy and program reforms that we felt would meet the needs of the community, and we presented these to them in a second forum a couple of months later. And here is where we got a sense for how these met with the community needs. And then from that moment forward, we went through with what I've titled here as negotiated creation. What I'm referring to here is essentially one of the greatest takeaways from this co-creation process was the constant balance of achievability and impact when it came to discussing the policy and program recommendations. So this was done in direct consultation with the government and with the community to make sure that we were balancing the impact but also balancing the achievability. And then further to the negotiated creation, it was looking at and discussing with the province and with the community what changes can be made to what exists and who is going to be impacted by said changes and what are their thoughts on said changes, and making sure that we had everyone around the table that was going to be involved in these. And then from there we went to we presented it and we launched it in February of 2015. And Zach, I think I'm going to pass it over to you now to kind of discuss the province's role and thoughts on this process.
Sure, thanks, Darcy. Zach Salter here. So I think, the social enterprise strategy is really a culmination of what our government has been doing really since we formed government in 1999. Since 1999, community members have been engaged in providing strategic advice to government on best approaches to supporting communities. And in the early 2000s, the government of Manitoba approved a community economic development policy framework to assist government departments in aligning their programs and policies to support local communities with a clear recognition of the value of community-based capacity and decision-making. In other words, we feel that the community members are best positioned to not only provide advice to government on how to respond to any issue proactively, but they are also involved in government decision-making. And I think the co-creation of the social enterprise strategy really embraced that philosophy. And so, as Darcy mentioned, last year, Budget 2014 committed to co-create a comprehensive strategy to grow the social enterprise sector and create more first jobs for individuals facing barriers. And so this is, I guess, the long arc of a CED lens in our government policy amounting to this strategy. And we feel that this strategy will notch it up, so to speak, and really be part of our government's aggressive plan to create jobs, grow the economy, and to reduce poverty and increase social inclusion. We see it as really an interlinked plan rather than seeing employment on one side and poverty on the other. So I just wanted to kind of skim over a bit of the background on where Manitoba is located in terms of how it's performing as an economy and how that relates to poverty, how that relates to particularly, racialized poverty and barriers in the labor market faced by many people, including Aboriginal people, newcomers, people with disabilities. So Manitoba, as you probably know, is among Canada's economic leaders right now in terms of GDP growth. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates. Last year we've been ranked first in job growth. And, the government has been aggressively investing in our different sectors to grow that economy while many other jurisdictions are opting for cuts or austerity. So this is definitely a different path. But we're not only doing the same old investments that you would see otherwise elsewhere or in the past. It really is a different type of growing the economy, but also creating good jobs. And we feel that the social enterprise strategy fits perfectly in this plan. So let's just backpedal a bit and talk about when the recession hit in 2008, 2009. Our government launched a very aggressive housing plan. That was to build 1,500 social units and develop 1,500 affordable units for a total of 3,000 units. And this was reiterated in 2013 when we added on top of that 500 social units and 500 affordable units. Now, this is part of our plan to reduce poverty. Housing is an integral part of this. And it also creates jobs, it's investment, and it ramps up the economy. And in 2013, we really doubled down and launched an aggressive infrastructure plan that amounts to $5.5 billion over 5 years. And so infrastructure, education, skills training, a very aggressive skills agenda was part of that 5-year plan. And so we started growing the economy, but we wanted to do an employment-focused social enterprise strategy also. And social enterprises can help us achieve those goals. Our goals are really to provide meaningful employment to those who are ready and willing to work, but who face multiple barriers in the labor market. On the slide, you'll see that we're also trying to breach what I call the unemployment rate floor, which is, officially we have a low rate of unemployment, but we have a section of the population that is systematically excluded from that labor market. And so social enterprises are right in there and help us lift those individuals out of poverty with a good job. So, and this year, in 2015, we've not only introduced a budget for the social enterprise strategy implementation over the next few years, but along with that, we've we've moved on other big measures, such as implementing fully our Rent Assist program, which provides a rental benefit, a portable rental benefit, for low-income Manitobans of up to 75% median market rent. So all these supports are designed to not only reduce poverty, but to reduce poverty by engaging those who have been traditionally excluded, and to engage them in a meaningful way, and to have them trained, have them develop skills, and establish for themselves a stable, decent living standard. So, you know, from our point of view, this is an innovative way of tackling poverty. It's an innovative way to increase employment and really, you know, help us achieve our objectives. And as I think David pointed out earlier, it is a type of demand-side model. The government has a role in promoting growth, promoting an environment in which anyone can work. And yeah, so again, this is a very innovative and exciting strategy. And I guess I can flip it over to Darcy so that he can fill in on CCEDNet side of things in terms of objectives.
Thanks, Zach. I've mostly, or before we sink too far into what we think the strengths of the strategy are, I do want to touch on what I think the strengths of what the real strengths for CCEDNet were when it came to the co-creation process. And I'm just going to go through these at a decently high level. But there's kind of 4 big takeaways that we had from the process that we think we really benefited from. The first of that is the mapping of existing resources and programs. We got the right players to the table to determine what exists. Without this, we had never known what provincial programs there are, what are in place, how they could be tweaked, how they could be changed, and what needed to happen to ensure that they met the needs of social enterprises. The province arriving and providing us an inventory and putting that back-end work into it for us meant that we could really target in where our changes were going to be and where our efforts were going to be to really take advantage of what existed the most. The second point is that we got big buy-in from all the stakeholders. The will to support and the will to implement the recommended policy and program changes is best secured by having the relevant stakeholders sitting at the table for setting the direction of that change. So in our case, this consisted of community leaders and the government departments getting their opinion on the policy and program recommendations and getting their insights on it really increased the buy-in from those folks when it comes time to actually rolling out some of the recommendations and for excitement and confidence in the strategy. Third point is the changes it made to our relationship dynamic. This is sort of changing from consultation to dialogue. It was speaking in both directions. It wasn't just one person speaking to and not one person being spoken to. Rather, it was a back and forth process of listening and reacting, and repositioning kind of where we were headed with the strategy in light of that. And then lastly, I discussed this earlier when it comes to the balance of achievability and impact. Having all the stakeholders at the table, and in particular having the province at the table, was very good for making sure that we had a keen scope on achievability. It was a difficult balance to find the middle ground between ensuring achievability but not limiting the imagination for impact. We didn't want to constrain people's thoughts too much and put too much of our thinking in a box. But having the government at the table to really lay out what was at our disposal and what could be implemented best was really strongly increased the achievability of the project. So those are the 4 takeaways that we have from the co-creation process. And I'd like to just kind of change over now to the strengths of the social enterprise strategy that we see from a CCEDNet perspective here. Once this slide changes over. Great. So there's a picture of the launch, which was the beginning of February. That is Minister Carrie Irvin-Ross with CCEDNet as we were launching the strategy, and also making an announcement for a affordable housing project that is coming through that will use social enterprises as a large component of the build and of the construction. So the strengths of the Manitoba Social Enterprise. Well, I just went over co-creation and co-production, so I don't think I'm going to necessarily re-emphasize that, but that is an enormous strength, an enormous boon for when it comes to the quality of this strategy. The strategy itself has a broad ecosystem supports. It builds up upon from what David was discussing earlier, the 6 pillars of social development. This is the framework that was provided by the Social Enterprise Council of Canada, and it looks at the full ecosystem that social enterprises are operating in, and all the areas that need to be strong and need to be fostered when it comes to their full development. So the development pillars and the recommendations we have within the document are not isolated from one another, and they're going to have varying windows of opportunity and need. So we're expecting to have an integrated approach for implementation, tackling what pillars when and tackling certain recommendations when we see opportunity for them, and then making sure that they develop together and are supportive of each other as our developments go forward. The ideas are based upon practice. There's very little in here that has not been tried somewhere else. There's very little in here that has not our precedent hasn't been set somewhere else. And we really focused on making sure that whatever solution had been created in Manitoba that could really be ramped up or that could be tweaked a bit more to meet the need, that's where we started. We know that what is homegrown is often most appropriate for a home, so that we went there, and then when we couldn't find a means of addressing a need identified by the community, then we would look for what was being done nationally and internationally when it came to practice that was addressing these needs. An interesting particularity for the Manitoba Social Enterprise Strategy, and this extends beyond the 6 pillars of social enterprise development, was the inclusion of wraparound supports as a key part of the pillars. The fundamental purpose of this project of the Social Enterprise Strategy is poverty reduction and the support and creation of work environments for people with barriers to employment. Wraparound supports for social enterprise employees are needed to ensure their success. As Zach mentioned, this includes affordable housing, childcare, mental and physical health care, cultural reclamation programming, and streamlined support systems to help transition folks from social enterprise into the private sector or to maintain their position if they're going to be working long-term at a social enterprise. So without this comprehensive set of social supports for the social enterprise employees, the impact of the social enterprise sector will be severely held back. Therefore, we made sure that a key component of the social enterprise strategy was to include work on these wraparound supports. We think it's unlikely that all social enterprises will provide all these supports internally, so a key part of the strategy is to figure out how we can set up networks, how we can make communications to the existing and new resources to understand how we can get shared services and streamlined services when it comes to the provision of wraparound supports for social enterprises. And then lastly, what I think is our biggest strength here, and I've touched on this a few times that I don't mind because I think it's important to repeat, the co-creation process came out with a very targeted and a very achievable series of recommendations and of program and policy recommendations. We think they are finely tuned to the realities of our social enterprise context, given the consultations that we did and that the steering committee was led by a strong social enterprise component. And we also know that it's quite in tune with the possibilities of the provincial government in respects to what lines up with their interests and what they believe is achievable within the time frames that we're dealing with. I don't know if, David, if you have anything that you want to jump in, I'm going to move over to the limitations after this if there's...
Yeah, and I think what's really valuable, Darcy, is your explanation that is comprehensive, and the idea of the wraparounds, that piece that the pillars are pillars and they're policy pillars, but the implementation and taking it down to the community level, I think is a real asset that's been added.
Yes, we're in complete agreement with that and had a very good experience for that. And we should add that it also builds capacity and builds buy-in on the social enterprise practitioner and at the ground level. You get folks that are dealing with some of the issues that aren't necessarily dealt with when your head's stuck dealing with the process of running a social enterprise, which is more than a full-time job generally. And so stepping back and kind of engaging folks in these conversations about some of the systems thought and some of the broad sector supports really expanded and built some of our local capacity here when it came to these issues. We do face limitations, though. And I think it's good to identify these and know them sort of off the hop. The strategy is not, it is a co-created strategy with the province of Manitoba and the community. However, we do not necessarily have explicit and clear support from other sectors and other jurisdictions. We do know that other sectors and jurisdictions are supportive. CCEDNet works with the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce on social enterprise issues. We work with the Winnipeg Police Service. We started working with the City of Winnipeg. However, the quick process, or the process with which we took to put together the social enterprise strategy, it was limited to the extent that we could actually engage external stakeholders. So while the recommendations and policy are primarily focused on the provincial government, some of these require support from community finance, from other levels of government, so now we'll have to, after the fact, go and forge these relationships and these partnerships. As we discussed for the second limitation, the scope of the social enterprise we're dealing with is actually quite narrow. We are focused explicitly on these recommendations on social enterprises that are providing job and training opportunities for people to barriers to employment. This was what was the common ground that we had with the province, and this is where we had the strongest strength of active social enterprises in the CCEDNet membership. However, I am quite confident that the benefits that are accrued from these policy and program recommendations will not be limited to this particular type of social enterprise. I think that social enterprises at large, whether they're cultural, environmental, or a different social focus, will be able to benefit from the policy and program changes that we hope that come from this strategy. And lastly, this isn't necessarily a limitation, but the implementation of the strategy is not included in the strategy document. This is a strength as well as it is a weakness. It was specifically left out during the process of drafting this document. We wanted to use our limited resources for the development of best policy and the best programming. We did not necessarily want to spend our time working out a detailed work plan given all the ambiguities of the future. So now we are going to be able to, we have the flexibility now, we would say, to pick and choose opportunities best and to sort of determine the implementation agilely, with some agility, in an evolving context. And this will be determined by a steering committee that is overseen by the community and by the government. And now we can go, I think, to kind of some lessons and advice here to sort of conclude before we get to the question period. Zach, I think I'll tee off to you here to discuss what your thoughts on co-creation and how this changes the relationship between government and communities.
Thanks, Darcy. Obviously, this is a process that really changes the relationship between government and communities. You know, it's not just government, you know, hearing what social enterprises have to say and then leaving with some notes and going back to their shops and producing policies. It really is a joint effort, and it makes the community more involved in policy formation and decision making. And ultimately it makes government, that is both elected officials and civil servants, more responsive to community needs. Because as I said earlier, the local community knows best in terms of what needs to be addressed, how do we address it, and provide options as to how we go about addressing them. And so really it's sort of breaking down that wall between government and the community. And I think, you know, going forward, this will be helpful in terms of how exactly we create a more inclusive society. It's not just, you know, people in government who have really good ideas, you know, and can help, you know, change communities. It's the community members themselves that can really be involved in that plan or that strategy. So really that to me is a big highlight of this strategy. Co-creation is not just talk, it's also working together. So that's really my takeaway from all of this. And from the government of Manitoba's point of view, that is also a very good takeaway.
Thanks, Zach. And so I'll bring just forward some of CCEDNet's thoughts. I should apologize potentially in advance. There is a social enterprise operating above my office, and someone seems to be learning how to use a drill press or a bandsaw of some nature. So if that noise comes in, just accept it as part of the wonderful work that we do. So some of the takeaways that CCEDNet really learned from this, and that we kind of want to let others know who are interested in this process, is the stakeholder buy-in is absolutely essential. Everyone who is going to contribute to the process, everyone who's going to be involved in the process of growing and growing and strengthening whatever the sector is, in our case the social enterprise sector, making sure that they are at the table and on board and feel that they're the whole way through, have an ownership over the process, the document, the policy, whatever you're creating. However this is achieved, it is essential to ensuring that the quality of the document and essential to ensuring that the implementation, the folks who are dealing with the implementation feel that they had a buy-in and a stake in the whole, a skin in the game of the whole process. Another takeaway that we found was very important is knowing and remembering the goal. Ensuring that everyone around the table agrees and has the goal of the process set out. And this can really help to make sure that, oh, there's the bandsaw. This can really make sure that we don't get lost in small problems or details that don't necessarily impact the goal. So always keeping that paramount and always keeping that in front. And then lastly, co-creation takes time and it takes resources. It takes time to consult. It takes time to research. It takes time to negotiate. It takes time to understand the various stakeholders' positions. And then it takes time to further consult and to go back and to include and to make sure that the document and the programs and the policy that comes out the other end of this process is genuinely co-created and it's bought into and it's supported by all the stakeholders that are responsible for it and want to work on it moving forward. And I think from there we can move onwards to our question and answer. David, if I can pass that back to you.
That's great. Well, and I want to pop into some of the questions. So please type your questions in. We've got a couple in there already. And that's a lot of material we covered. So the questions probably pretty wide-ranging, but don't hesitate. Post them, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I have a question, Zach and Darcy. Maybe you can take a second to answer, and then we'll go to the posted ones. Would you give one or two highlights of what were the preconditions? Because I think a lot of people look at the result of this and say this is really great, and you talked about the process that happened. And Darcy, you mentioned coming out of the Social Enterprise World Forum, but I suspect there's more. What would you say are two or three of the preconditions, Zach, in government, and then Darcy in community, that allowed this to happen?
Well,
so if someone was thinking about moving on this, how do you prepare the ground?
Well, I would say that obviously, an engaged local community, and that was a result of not only an engaged citizenry in these sectors, but we also invite local communities in pressing their demands on government. And those links between folks at the political level and the sector are crucial. And I think the persistence of, for example, CCEDNet in really demanding that the government move from targeted supports to a more comprehensive package of supports is the result of some very persistent lobbying from the folks on the ground, the connections between folks in government and the people in the community. These are crucial aspects. I don't think it would have been possible to have what we produced or co-produced without those interpersonal links between the two sides. And touching on what I said earlier, it makes government a lot more porous, so to speak. So those, I think, were really some of the factors in leading up to this. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that, Darcy, or add additional ones.
I think that I would reinforce some of the points that you made there, Zach. I think they were all pretty bang on. The key parts being that CCEDNet had a relationship with the province before this. There was a track record of working together, and CCEDNet has been a long-time member network for many organizations that the province funds when it comes to the province's social services and poverty reduction work. So we've built the respect from the province, being seen as the voice that convenes and leads nonprofits and community economic development support. And as Zach said, the community support was there. The sector came together, the social enterprise sector came together to present one voice when it came to what the sector wanted and moving forward. And the ability to galvanize and organize that support was crucial to the process. And I think a third point that just points out was that the province has success with the co-op visioning strategy. Andy has made comment to this in a question in the comment box. They had already launched a 5-year strategy for the co-op sector that was done in a co-creation process, different than ours, but similar in philosophy and in sentiment. And the results of that were favorable, and that was a good precedent that we could draw upon for what was possible here.
So one of the questions is, are there any particular industries or sectors that this strategy is going to target? I mean, it's focused on employment, but that's the impact. Is there an industry or sector strategy?
Zach, I can take this one if you don't.
Sure,
mind.
Sure.
One of the things that we're actually dealing with is making sure that we spread out our sectors and spread out the diversity that social enterprise is operating in. We have a bit of we have a lot of strong social enterprises that are working in the construction industry, in trades, in doing apartment unit turnovers and installation and these types of hands-on trade skills. And they are the flagship of a lot of this. And as you'll notice before, we commented on how Budget 2015 had a commitment from Manitoba Housing to double their spending in the next 2 to 3 years on those particular social enterprises. But we need to widen out the sectors that we're serving and the sectors that social enterprises are operating in. That way folks with barriers to employment who are looking for an employment and training opportunity don't necessarily have to be pigeonholed into these key areas of work that is happening, notably male-based trades. So in that sense, we're looking to expand into other sectors and looking to broaden it out. I'll also kind of sort of comment that when it comes to areas we're focusing on, part of that is just making sure that all the jurisdictions that we have at our disposal, the City of Winnipeg and a little bit of the private sector higher level chambers of commerce, these thought leaders, making sure that they're supportive of social enterprise and of the sector and finding ways that we can expand through more work for them and sort of diversify the purchasers that are purchasing from us.
So Andy pointed out hardwired to ask about implications for the North, and myself having done a lot of work in rural British Columbia. How does this amplify into like some of the northern social enterprise development in Manitoba, where the market is so different and the infrastructure is so different? So any thoughts on that as you had these discussions?
I could start it off, Darcy.
Sure.
Absolutely. I know Andy, so I know where she's coming from. I worked with Andy on a few things, and one of which was the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative, which was an initiative that began about 12 years ago here, and it was really promoting community-based local food production. And last year we decided to really focus on local food production from a social enterprise point of view. And recently we helped, I guess, start up a local food social enterprise up in one of our First Nations communities in northern Manitoba, Garden Hill First Nation. And this was a collaboration between the Regional Health Authority, the University of Manitoba, Aki Energy, which does some geothermal. And so this was a collaboration and culminated into really a community-based local food enterprise that will, it's almost like another form of import substitution. So the community is really growing its own food, raising its own meat, and investing that money in the local economy, rather than purchasing junk food or food that is less costly but less healthy. And really that money leaves the community altogether. So the north is, I think, an untapped area with respect to the social enterprise strategy. And I think a first step forward was to invest in that local food social enterprise in Garden Hill. And if that model can be replicated across the north, I think we would be breaking new ground in northern Manitoba.
So that's really encouraging, because already then what you're inferring, Zach, is that the strategy and the attention to social enterprise has gone beyond just employment.
It has, and obviously it has an employment component to it. You know, investment in local food production leads to, you know, job creation and growing the local economy. But it has implications on every other aspect of those communities: health, well-being, a sense of ownership and over your community. It's bigger, and so the strategy is although it does focus on employment and training, can lead to a whole other set of positives that benefit everyone.
Good. And I think we're coming to the end of our time, but the chat room is already making other connections between Andy and Josh and others, so that's really valuable. Josh, if you can't get a hold of Andy directly, I'm sure if you get a hold of CCEDNet, they can help you with that connection. And I just want to, you know, thank everyone, you know, who's spent the time today, and especially, you know, Zach and Darcy. Any closing comment before we kind of close things up?
Zach, do you want to go ahead, or do you have?
Go ahead, Darcy.
We're excited. I guess that can be the closing sentiment. We think this document is, and we think this strategy and this plan is pointed. We think it's in tune. We think it's achievable. And we think that we have a willing partner at the province to push forward on this. And so we're very excited to see these changes come in and some of these policies get put in place. And then we're cognizant there's a bunch of opportunity that is not laid out in this document that will only arise as we move forward and as we make new connections, as we make new developments and new ecosystem strengths that involve other stakeholders, that involve other sectors, and that involve other levels of government, that we're excited to use this as a foundation for pushing off and really, really growing this into areas that have been untapped so far.
I would second that, Darcy.
Yeah, and I just want to congratulate both of you representing community and government in Manitoba on behalf of the larger social enterprise sector in Canada, from both my hat with the Social Enterprise Council of Canada and my CCEDNet policy member hat. This is really a major stride for social enterprise in Canada, and so I think we owe you a lot of thanks for the effort that went in, and also want to congratulate you on all of that. So that's just great.
Thank you, David.
So we're going to go now to the next slide. And we just want to remind you that here's some links for more information. If you'd like to learn more about the organizations of the presenters today, just follow the links. If you want to stay in touch around CED-related issues, make sure you check out CCEDNet's website, sign up to their free email newsletter, become a member, and finally, you're going to receive an email with a link to a 1-minute evaluation survey. So if you can take a second or two and fill that out right now, your feedback is really important, because as we design this type of information sharing and what are the topics that are of interest to you and how does this resonate. So if you can take a second to fill that out, that would be great. And then just one more thanks to Zach and Darcy for sharing, really unique and important perspectives and their experience on this. And also thank you to all the participants for taking the time, sending in your questions, and your continued engagement. The webinar recording will be posted on the CCEDNet website in the coming days, and we'll send you a link as soon as it's available. So thanks, everyone. And Mike, if you have anything to close with, otherwise we'll call it a day.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for hosting. It was a tremendous session.
Thank you, David.
Okay, take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.